Thank the member for Mallee. Call the member for Gellibrand.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. When Labor came to government in 2007, it inherited a mismanaged and politically driven system of infrastructure investment. Productivity ran a very poor second to politics, and the national interest lost out to the interests of the National Party. So in 2008, the previous Labor government created a new system for the delivery of infrastructure, one that took a new approach. We stated that to secure Australia's future prosperity, you needed to decouple the infrastructure investment cycle, which necessarily needed to be a long-term one, from the political cycle, which in the experience of those opposite is much shorter. That is why the previous Labor government created Infrastructure Australia as an independent advisor to government and asked it to assess the nation's infrastructure needs and created a priority list of projects that its experts believe would do the most to boost national productivity. The previous Labor government laid a foundation for a rational and integrated and evidence-based policy framed on the basis of the national economic benefit. In contrast, on infrastructure, the coalition wants to end integrated, evidence-based delivery of roads, ports, railway lines, public transport and many other works that go to improving our standards of living and our economic productivity. This independent, expert-led process has found that in my electorate, the Melbourne Metro Rail Tunnel is Victoria's #1 infrastructure priority. By 2025, Melbourne's population will hit 5 million. Urban traffic congestion is a national problem, which, if not combated, will cost us $20 billion a year in lost productivity by 2020. As the Chair of Infrastructure Australia has said, unless our rail networks are right, Australia's cities won't work properly. The Infrastructure Australia endorsed Melbourne Metro Rail project aims to increase the capacity and reliability of Melbourne's public transport network to support growth and demand driven by our ever-increasing population. This project, which is listed as ready to proceed by Infrastructure Australia, will provide capacity for an additional 24,000 passengers per year initially, rising to an additional 60,000 per year. By 2030, 140,000 passengers will be able to use Melbourne Metro during the morning peak. Infrastructure Australia is recommending that we make a generational investment to benefit the entire Melbourne Metropolitan Rail network by increasing capacity to relieve congestion and accommodate future growth. The Melbourne Metro Rail is the 21st century City Loop, something that those opposite may consider supporting, given that the original Melbourne City Loop was introduced by those known socialists, Dick Hamer and Henry Bolte. Of course, commuters in Melbourne's west will see none of these benefits because, for purely ideological and political reasons, Tony Abbott has ruled out any Commonwealth funding for urban public transport infrastructure. He said that he wants to be the infrastructure Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of 21st century infrastructure. Well, it seems there's been a typo, because the PM really wants to be the PM of first century infrastructure, the roads that have been built since the Roman age, not the rail and broadband investments of the next century. Before the last election, Tony Abbott told the Australian public that the Commonwealth Government had, quote, no history of funding urban rail and that the government should, quote, stick to its knitting and only fund road projects. What little substance there is to this comment is, of course, factually inaccurate, Mr Deputy Speaker, as the $3.3 billion in federal funding for the Regional Rail Link project in my own electorate can adequately attest. In fact, based on independent economic analysis provided by Infrastructure Australia, the previous Labor government committed a record $13.6 billion towards urban public transport infrastructure projects. This was a responsible, grown-up way for government to plan infrastructure investment. In contrast, the Abbott government has left commuters in Australia's cities stranded by refusing to invest a single cent in public transport infrastructure on the basis of nothing more than an ideologically driven arts and crafts analogy. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is not only those of us on this side of the House who are baffled by this position. The Victorian Liberal Party cannot understand it either. The Napthine government likes to pretend that it supports public transport in Victoria, though, like those opposite, it had a lot more to say about this issue than it actually did in government. But nonetheless, the Napthine government likes to pretend that it will one day deliver the Melbourne Metro Rail Tunnel for Victorian commuters. Understandably, for a project of this size, there's long been an expectation in the Victorian government that Commonwealth funding will be required to deliver it. Given this, the then Leader of the Opposition's outright opposition to public transport funding put the Victorian Premier in a bit of a difficult position. So, Dennis Napthine sought to soften the then Opposition Leader's stubborn opposition to this project, telling Victorians that, I've certainly had some conversations about Tony Abbott's issue with Rail Tunnel, and he's softened. He's indicated to me that they're prepared to have an ongoing discussion on key infrastructure like the Melbourne Metro Rail Tunnel. But Tony Abbott didn't take the hint. He immediately battered down his Victorian Liberal colleague, saying that I would dispute that that's the case. What I say in public and what I say in private is the same. We will not be committing to the Melbourne Metro Rail scheme. I've made that absolutely clear. Maybe the Victorian Premier would have had better luck if he'd been asking for a no-strings-attached cheque from the Education Minister. Maybe he could have snuck it through then. The Melbourne Metro Rail Tunnel will not be delivered unless we have a Labor government federally and at state level.
Member for